right, let's get started. Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Braden Riggs. I'm a developer advocate with the Dolby IO team, here today to do a bit of a workshop to get everybody started with the Dolby IO spatial chat plugin for Unity. So this video, you can either follow along with it and see how we build and put together this Unity project, or as you'll see shortly, we do have some resources if you'd like to instead see a written version of this workshop. Now, to get started, there are a couple of different things we're going to have to do. First thing is I'm going to recommend that you actually open up the Dolby IO Samples Workshop multiplayer demo. Let me drag this down here. This is the completed version of the workshop that we're about to do today. It's located on Dolby IO Samples, which is the GitHub account for Dolby IO, where we include all of our public code samples for how to use the Dolby IO platform. So you can see here, there's a lot of instructions on how to get everything set up, some requirements, a written tutorial if you prefer to read rather than listen. All this material's here. Now, I'm going to recommend that you have this open because we're going to actually borrow some parts from this project. So we're going to effectively build this workshop multiplayer demo from scratch. But there are a couple of things that I'm going to steal, namely a few of the scripts in the scripts folder. And I'll let you know when we do that. But just worth having that open in advance so that we can keep this all quick. Now, additionally, you're going to want to have Unity installed on your machine. I'm using a Windows machine, which means things might look slightly different. So if you're using Windows, that's easy, follow along. If you're using an iOS device or Mac, make sure that you are cognizant of that and pay attention. And to get started, I'm actually going to ask that this is an old project that I have. I'm actually going to ask that we start really quickly right now by creating a new project and using the third person template. Now, creating this project does take a little bit, so that's why I'm getting us started on doing that right now. Additionally, you're going to need a Dolby IO account. Now, you can just sign up for a Dolby IO account by heading to Dolby IO and clicking the sign up button in the top right corner. You can sign up with GitHub, Google, or sign up with your email. It's free to create an account. You don't need to put in a credit card or do anything like that. You're given plenty of trial credits for getting a project up and running. And this is a requirement for using Dolby IO's Spatial Chat API. So as I'm going through some of these next steps here, just make sure that you're getting signed up for an account, you're creating that third person template so that we can get moving with this project. Now, what are we going to do today? Well, for one, we're going to set up our Unity environment to develop with Dolby IO plugins. Two, we're going to actually set up and use the Dolby IO Spatial Chat plugin for Unity. And three, we're going to build a multiplayer experience to actually test out our Spatial Chat plugin. But you're probably asking yourself, what is Spatial Chat? Well, Spatial Chat, sometimes it's called 3D chat or even proximity chat, depending on how that's defined, is a form of many-to-many player-to-player communication, where players' voices are rendered in this 3D space. Now, this means that players located on your avatar's left in the virtual space will have their audio rendered and played as if it's coming from the left. Same thing if someone is standing above and behind you, it's going to sound like it's coming from above and behind you. Now, there's a lot of reasons why spatial chat is really interesting, but for one, it kind of mimics how we hear and interact with people in the real world. And that's a very powerful thing to be able to translate into the game space. So how does Dolby IO actually do and accomplish that? Well, what we do is we take the audio from the game client along with information around the position of the game entity, and we pass that up to the Dolby IO servers. The Dolby IO servers then do all the heavy lifting and mix it before distributing back to the other players inside the game. Now, what's really cool about this is the Dolby.io servers can take in hundreds of people's voices talking in a given space and mix it. But for the end user who's then receiving that audio stream, they receive only one fully mixed audio stream. So it doesn't actually have any additional bandwidth requirements when compared to traditional voice chat in video games. Now, because this is leveraging the Dolby.io servers, it does require connection to these servers via the internet. Now, this experience is also explicitly designed for multiplayer games, so it doesn't really work in the single player space. It's all about players communicating. So, of course, that's got to be some kind of multiplayer or virtual world type experience. Now, currently, the plugin also does not dynamically interact with the game's physics engine. So what that means is you have to explicitly add rules to allow the Dolby.io servers to know where and when positions of players are, whether there's like a wall there, whether there's things that are interfering with the audio. Currently, we don't do this dynamically, but as you'll see in the tutorial, it's pretty easy to set up a few different rules that allow these audio interactions to take place. Now, how it actually works in the game experience and how 3D audio is defined is players are organized along a Cartesian plane of either 2 dimensions, if you're building a 2D game, of X and Y, or 3 dimensions of X, Y, and Z, based on the Unity coordinates system. And as they move, their position can be updated on the server, allowing their voice to move around with them. Now, scale must also be defined in the virtual world. Scale dictates how the volume of the player's voice changes as they move closer or further from you in a virtual world. Scale can kind of be thought of as like the velocity of the voice. If a player is coming towards you, how quickly does their voice get louder, or if they're going away from you, how quickly does it get quieter? Now you can kind of see on this dummy in the top right corner, and actually let me move my camera out of the way. There we go. You can see on this dummy in the top right corner, up is exactly what you imagine it to be. It's directly up. Forward is if the player was moving forward, backward, and then to the right. And as you can see in the bottom right corner, we actually have this scale defined as being 1, 1, 1, which means every time someone moves forward, the scale at which they're moving is only incremented by 1. It's only multiplied by 1. If someone is moving up, it's only incremented by up. And if someone is moving to the right, it is only incremented to the right. Now, if, for example, you wanted to invert the audio, so if someone gets further away from you, they get louder, or if they get closer, they get quieter, you could just actually make all these values negative, or you can make the scale negative. So now that we understand a bit about how this actually works, let's get started building and see what we can come up with when we build the spatial chat audio experience. Now, just so my camera isn't blocking the game, I'm gonna actually remove it from here on out. So you'll see my video again at the end, but for now, it's just gonna be the Unity game engine. So let's get building. All right, so by now your third person template should have loaded and you should be in your game development environment. If you haven't seen this third person template before, it's really simple. It's just a basic game with a character that you can walk around a little pre-built map. Now the reason we use this is because it provides a great jumping off point for adding spatial audio to the environment and building a multiplayer experience. So now with our third-person template created, we can get to actually installing the plugins that we're going to need for building in this workshop. So head up to the Window tab here and open up the Package Manager, and there's 2 plugins that we're going to need. The first one is the Dolby.io Communications Spatial Chat plugin. You can find this at the Dolby.io GitHub under Comms SDK Unity. Now there's a couple of different versions of this plugin. I'm going to make a note in the description of this video if you're watching this on YouTube of which version is the most up to date. For this particular demo, I'm going to be using the version 1.2 beta 2 release right here. And we're going to go ahead and copy this URL, head back into our game environment, and go add package from git URL. Paste it in here. Now it's worth noting that you should have git LFS set up on your local machine in order to be able to clone some of these projects. So this is going to take a few minutes to install. Another package that we're going to be interested in using is going to be the Unity netcode plugin. Now the Unity netcode plugin gets updated pretty frequently. So there's a high likelihood that you're going to be seeing a different version of the Unity netcode plugin. I've got it right here. But for this version, I'm going to be using 1.4. And I'll show you how to install that specific version if you want to follow along. But it's a great project. We're using this specifically to actually handle the multiplayer experience. So this is a good time to mention that Dolby.io and the Dolby.io Spatial Chat plugin only handles the audio and video communication between players. It does not track the actual physical location of players inside a game experience. And so what that means is you need to have something like netcode for game objects to be able to actually track and render players moving around each other. So great, we've got the Dolby.io communications plugin installed, and then we're just going to install the netcode game objects plugin. So to do that, I'm going to add package by name. I'm going to paste in the name of the netcode plugin, and I'm going to specify the version, which is 1.4.0. Click add. And this is going to take a few minutes to install. Wonderful. So we can now see in projects, we have the Dolby.io communications release, and we have the netcode game release, specifically 1.4.0. So inside Dolby Communications, you'll see we actually have a few different samples we can import as well. For this, I'm going to import the shared scene sample, as it's a great way to just demo spatial audio really quickly. So again, this is going to take a second to load, but it should be a bit quicker. There we go. So with that, we've now installed all of the packages and all of the plugins we're going to need for building this experience, and we can move on to learning how the Dolby.io Spatial Chat plugin works. So you'll see that inside the samples, we now have a Dolby.io communications folder. And inside that, we specifically have this shared scenes folder. Now this is the prefab that we just imported. And what you can actually do is you can take this shared scene and drop it into your game world. Now it's going to add a few different objects here, one of which is this app object. So this is just a quick little prefab that we put together, and it just demonstrates spatial audio. And so to actually use it, you can head over to your Dolby.io dashboard, open up one of your applications, and grab a client access token right here. So you can copy that. And then inside this prefab, you can paste the token. Paste the token in. And from here, when you play the experience, you'll get a little audio experience demonstrating some of our spatial audio technology. Now, this is great for understanding, how spatial audio works a little bit. But in this game, we're really interested in building player-to-player communications. And we're interested in doing that for a multiplayer experience. So I just thought I'd mention the shared scene, as it's a really nice, quick way to get up and going. But I'm actually going to remove the shared scene from this experience. Cool. So from here, you can see we've got a few different things going on. We have inside of our assets quite a few different things. We have some scripts over here, which we're going to get to in a little bit. That's going to be pretty important. We have some prefabs, which come alongside the third person template. And then we have a few other different things in here that are going to be useful as we get to them. Now, the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create an empty object in the playground, and we're just going to want to call that Dolby Comps. Cool. And from here, we're going to add a component, and the component is specifically going to be the Dolby I/O Manager. Inside the Dolby I/O Manager, we're going to want to set the main camera as the listening object. So what this is doing right here is we're just saying wherever the main camera is, that's where we want our audio listener to be picking up audio. So in this case, we want it picking up from the default microphone on the system. In addition to this, we're going to add another component called script machine. And inside the script machine, we're going to create a new script that I'm going to call multi-script. And from here, we're going to want to click Edit Graph. Cool. So this is our script editor. As you can see, the script editor starts with a couple of different things. We have the on start and the on update. And we're going to want to add a few things to this graph. The first node that we're going to want to add is just going to be called initialize. And specifically, it's going to be the Dolby I/O communications version of it right here. And we're going to link on event start to initialize. Additionally, we're going to want to add token. Now this is how we authenticate connecting up to the Dolby I/O servers. And as you can see, we've got two spots here. One that takes an application key and one that takes an application secret. So if you head back to your dashboard, you can copy the application key, paste it into here. And you can copy the application secret, paste it into here. Very good. And that's going to authenticate our connection up to the Dolby I/O servers. Additionally, in the on start node, we're going to want to tick coroutine. This means that the event can continuously be updating and is required when we're constantly querying the Dolby I/O servers for audio or giving it audio data. Now, in addition to this, we're going to want to add another node that is called conference. Again, Dolby I/O communications. From here, we can link up initialize to conference, and this is going to control our spatial positioning. Now, a few notes here. There are a couple of different spatial audio styles. You're going to want to stick to shared since we're building this collaborative multiplayer experience. And I'm going to recommend that you keep scale as well as the forward, up, and right components the same. If you remember in the slides earlier, I talked a little bit about that and how you can adjust and play around with these values for different experiences. But for this experience, we're going to want to keep it the same. So from here, we've got our new 3 nodes. We've all hooked it up to OnStart. We're actually all done here. So we can save this and we can exit out. Now from there, we've actually finished implementing the Dolby I/O communications component of this. So it's pretty simple. Just to recap really quickly, we added the Dolby I/O manager and set the appropriate audio listener. We added the script machine and we created a new script which handles that authentication and connection logic. So from here, we now have spatial audio implemented in the game experience. And we can hit play and we can test this out and we can actually walk around in the game experience. Now the problem here is that this experience isn't actually going to work because for spatial audio to work, it requires two-way communication. So what we're going to have to do now is we're actually going to have to create a multiplayer experience. So again, there's a lot of different ways you can do this in Unity, and this is by no means the best way of creating a multiplayer experience. It's just one way I wanted to showcase how you can set up a multiplayer experience to test locally, and that's using the netcode plugin. So to get started using the netcode plugin, we're going to want to create another empty object called network manager. Now inside network manager, we're going to want to add a component called network manager. And the first thing we're going to want to do inside of network manager is we're going to come to this player prefab section here, and we're going to want to open the assets prefab section, and we're going to want to set it to the player model. Oops, got to click back. We're going to want to set it to the player model, which you can just drag and drop just like that. Additionally, we're also going to want to add another component called Unity Transport. There we go. You can see this information down here. Very good. Now inside Network Manager, you're going to see this tab here, which is the Network Prefabs list. We're going to want to drop that down, and you see it's populated with an element called Default Network Prefabs. We're going to want to click into this element. You can see here. And we're going to actually want to hit the plus icon here. And we're going to go back to our prefabs, and we're going to add the player character model to this as well. Very cool. So if we go back to Network Manager, we've set the player prefab to the character object. We've set the network prefabs list to the player object. And we've added the Unity transport. Now for this next part, we're actually going to go and get some scripts that I kind of talked about earlier from the total completed project that I introduced earlier in this presentation. So if I open up this, you can see this is the completed workshop. We're going to want to copy this URL right here. And we're going to open it up. Very good. Now from here, if we head into assets, then scripts, we're going to want to replace the scripting portion of this game experience with the scripts that you see in here. So basic rigid body actually is just going to stay the same, but we're going to want client network animator, client network transform, network UI, terrain boundaries, and third-person controller. Now, if we look in our project in the script section already, you'll see we have third-person controller and the basic rigid body push. We're going to want to replace third-person controller, so I can get rid of that, with our own version. Now, the reason we're doing this and the reason we're just downloading these scripts is because we kind of want to speed up this process a little bit. There's some code inside the scripts that allows this functionality to work. And if you're interested in learning more specifically about the scripts, you can open them up and take a look at what we've done inside, or you can have a look at the video linked in the description of this video. Now for me specifically, I've already got these scripts downloaded on my machine. So I'm going to open them up, copy them, and I'm going to drop them all in here. Now it's going to take a second. The game is going to have to reload everything. But these scripts are pretty basic. So client network transform is really just a wrapper for the netcode functionality. Or sorry, there's client network transform. Client network animator, similarly, is just very, very simple. Network UI gets a little bit more advanced, but again, it's really just implementing the server, host, and client button functionality, which we'll see in a second. Third person is where it gets a little bit more complicated, as this tracks the spatial position as it relates to the character model moving around, as well as how to connect up and how to generate these character models for people joining the game experience. Now what we can do here is we can actually remove the player character from this experience. It's going to go, oh, it does not have a network object. Do you want to add one? We're going to ignore that for the moment because we're actually going to delete this character object from the game experience. Now, the reason we're deleting it from the game experience is because in this game experience, what we want to do is we want the actual game engine to spawn in the character as multiplayer characters join. So we don't want the client by default to already have a character in the experience. We want it to spawn a new one as someone hosts the experience, and then spawn multiple more as people come and join into the experience. So we're going to remove it from the experience for now. We're going to head over to prefabs, player character model, which is just the one that's stored in the prefab section. We're going to get this prompt, which is does not have a network object. Would you like to add one? And we're going to say yes. So we've added that in there. Cool. So from here, our multiplayer experience is starting to come together, but we need to add some functionality for joining the experience. So from here, we're going to create a UI canvas that we're just going to call UI canvas. Cool. And inside of the US canvas, we're first going to come down here to the canvas scaler, and we're going to set this to scale with screen size. And then inside, we're going to start adding buttons. So we're going to add this button. We're going to get prompted if we want to import the TMP essentials. We're going to click that, yes. We don't need the examples and extras. We're good with just the essentials, so we can exit out of there. And as you can see, we've added this button. Now we're going to rename this button to server button. And we're going to edit the text inside this option just to say server. Now, additionally, we need to place this button. Placement is pretty arbitrary, so I usually just put them somewhere up top. So 50, X position negative 100, 200. Cool. So we've placed our server button. Next, we're going to add another button. This one we're going to call our host button. We're going to call it host. And then we're going to place this button right there. And we're going to add our third and final button. This one is just going to be called client button. Inside the client button, I'm going to edit the text to say client. And we're going to then place this button oops, oh, I'm editing the Z position. Silly me, 200. There we go. Cool. So now all we've done is we've just added these buttons. We haven't really hooked them up to anything, and they don't really do anything yet. So to actually give them functionality inside this canvas, we're going to add an empty object called network UI. And inside network UI, we're going to add a component called network UI. Now this is going to handle all the logic for the buttons. And from here, we can just pair them up with their respective buttons. So the server button, the host button, and the client button. Great. So now that we're done setting up our network UI, there's a couple more things we have to do, then we're ready to test. The first thing we need to do is we actually need to go back to Network Manager, and we need to select, we need to specify the transport protocol. Specifically, we want to use Unity Transport right there. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we want to come down to our player character model here. we want to add two components. The first component that we're going to want to add is client network transform. Now we're going to add this. We're going to remove the scale parameters from it and the rotation parameters. This means that all we want to track with relation to the character is its X, Y, and Z position, as well as its rotation, since this is all we need for spatial audio. We want to know where the character is, and we want to know which way they're facing, so that we can render the audio appropriately. Additionally, we want to add a client network. In the client network animator, client network animator, we're just going to want to assign to the player character model. Again, this is just so that the other player can actually render and see the animations. Now, from here, we should be all ready to go. There are a couple quality of life features that we want to add. The first one is we want to come to Edit here, Project Settings, and we want to make sure that the resolution is set to window, as this is going to help us test. Additionally, in the Build settings, we're going to want to make sure that if you're using a Mac device, that you assign names and permissions to the microphone and the camera. And this is really important because when you actually run the game, in a Mac development environment, if it can't access the camera or the microphone, it's not going to work, and it's also going to throw an error. So you need to do that. But from here, we can click Build and Run. Great. So with the game experience now built, you can actually run the game we created. So here you can see it's in this little window, and what we want to do is we want to open up a second version of it right here. We can have them alongside. This takes a second to load. Now in this experience here, we can click Host, and we spawn into the game here. And in this one here, I can click Client, spawn in, and then you can see we've spawned in a copy. Now right now, I currently don't have my microphone connected up to the game experience, so the spatial audio experience isn't firing. But what I can do is I can actually unplug my computer and speak into it. Now because we're rendering spatial audio on one device here, when really it's meant to be two devices. You know, it's two people playing a game, each on separate computers with separate headphones, hearing the other person. That's the intended experience. Doing it here on the same computer, you're just going to kind of hear like a loud echo from me. But I'm going to unplug my microphone and I'm going to test it out in a second. So, ready to listen.
Testing. Testing.
Great. So as you can tell, that audio experience is a little disorientating because it's really not meant to be happening on the same device. You're meant to split this across multiple devices, but it's a great way to prove and to actually show that it's working. So with that said, that's the end of the workshop. In this workshop, we learned how to implement the Dolby.io spatial chat plugins for Unity. And we also learned how to build a really basic multiplayer experience to test it out. As you can tell, this game is not ready for production. This is really just a quick and easy build to get you started. But hopefully it helps give you the building blocks or the ideas that you might have for building out a more robust and exciting experience. So with that said, I'm going to put a few links up on screen. The documentation links are great places to go if you want to have a more written, granular understanding of how the plugins work. And then the GitHub links are great places to go for, one, getting the plugins, but two, for opening up any issues that you might have encountered while playing around with this, or to look at other issues people have had in case there's already a fix. So with that said, that's the end of the workshop. So please reach out if you have any questions, open any issues, check out the documentation, and start building some really compelling interactive audio experiences inside of Uni. Thank you very much.